always too quick to respond, and we don't actually take a time out. And by that I mean even a minute pause is enough for us to collect ourselves just so that we say the right words.
Welcome back to another episode of the Succeed Against the Odds show. And today, as my guest, I have Veronica Armstrong. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Francesca. It's lovely to be here.
I'm excited about what you do and what you're about. So, for the sake of our audience, who may not know who Veronica Armstrong is, would you like to share a little bit about what you do?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'd love to. Well, as you have already mentioned, I am a lawyer. I also am a communications trainer, and I know people say that's funny, because lawyers don't know how to communicate. Well, I actually think it's part of my obligation as a lawyer to make sure that I communicate clearly, not only with my clients, but I also happen to teach workshops to lawyers to encourage them to communicate clearly to their clients.
So Veronica, this is very fascinating. So if you wouldn't mind, because I really don't know you, so I'm just going to be your advocate here. I'm going to ask questions.
Sure.
So you're a lawyer. May I ask what kind of lawyer are you?
I mostly work in securities law, and that has to do with investments. My clients are investment firms for the most part, and I also have a corporate practice, so I deal with small business, help them to get their books right, make sure they incorporate properly, draw up their contracts for them, and I do what I call personal planning. So I help mostly older people get their wills done, powers of attorney. When they're nearing the end of their life, I do representation agreements for them so that they can get all their affairs in order.
Well, that's important to have your communication clear when you're working in all of that.
Absolutely, yes. And it's very important for me because most of my clients, in fact, in that area are elderly women. And I really think it's, for me, really an obligation to explain to them exactly what is happening and exactly what the documents say so that they know what they're doing, so they can make informed decisions.
So they can understand, especially when it comes to legal things. I think the biggest challenge for most people, I will speak for myself, is the lingo. When it comes to the legal lingo, it's like, this is like a completely different language, and sometimes you almost feel like you're stupid for not understanding it because it's written in a language you're supposed to understand. So you make that process easier for clients.
Yes, for sure. I mean, the thing is, we all get trapped in that legalese, and we think that we're being stupid when we're shown a document and it's written in English and we can't understand a word of it. And I must admit that sometimes happens to me still if I look at an insurance contract as an example. But there has been a movement all across the world for what we call plain language. And in Canada, in fact, financial institutions have to put their documents into plain language, so language that readers can understand. That's why you'll see now with your credit cards and your mortgages, the language is much simpler than it used to be in the past.
So it's reachable and accessible.
Absolutely, exactly. It's got to be accessible to the audience. I mean, the people who are going to use them, right? So the consumer, very important that they understand what's going on with their finances. And so I make it a point in my practice, in fact, to make language as clear as possible. So if you come to me for a will, for example, I make sure that it's in language that you will understand. If you ask me to draw up a contract for you, you know exactly what your rights and obligations are.
Okay, so share with us, if you will, if you're willing to, how does one go from being a lawyer? I get it that you want to make sure your clients understand and you use, simpler language, but how does one go from being a lawyer to now training people in communication? Like, what happened that led you to do that?
Well, as you might tell from my accent, I'm from South Africa, and years ago I was working at a major bank in South Africa, and they had decided at that time that they were going to set up a section of the bank, a completely separate bank in fact, called People's Bank, and that was to service the illiterate and semi-literate part of the population. And they had asked me if I would draw up the documents for that. So people would come into the bank, they'd open a savings account or a checking account, but they might not necessarily know what that entailed. And so it was my job to actually put that into words that they could understand. Now, at that time, I was very new to simplifying language. I did actually take a course in South Africa from somebody who was teaching it, an engineer, as it happened. Strange, but it just goes to show technical jargon, whatever it is, can be translated. And I did that. I would do things very differently now because I have a lot more experience now. But that really hooked me on the idea that it's not only people we call illiterate or semi-literate who can't understand legalese. It's almost everybody, highly intelligent people who are well-read, who might not be able to understand how those words are put together and why they're put together in the way they are.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, before we started the recording of this interview, you mentioned to me that one of the areas that you like to focus on is the communication within the family and within partnerships and relationships.
Yes.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, okay, so I know it does seem strange again for a lawyer to be doing this, but because I'm so passionate about making sure that communication is effective, I was for years, and I continue to do so on a very occasional basis, teach plain language workshops. So teaching people how to write more effectively so that they can get their message across. And then I started to wonder how you could actually do that with conversation. Because very often, and it's happened to me on occasion too, where I'm having a conversation with somebody, I think I've explained myself very clearly, and the response comes back showing that in fact I wasn't as clear as I could have been. So it made me wonder, how do we practice this kind of clear communication in our relationships, and wouldn't we be able to actually foster and enhance our relationships, particularly within the family and with our loved ones, so that we don't have those arguments that really boil up and fester and, you know, sometimes in the end turn into a breakup of the whole family.
So do you offer workshops for
I
that?
do, yes, I offer workshops. I offer an evening workshop, a 2-hour workshop as an introductory session to people. And then I run a 1-day workshop where I cover various areas of how we can be more authentic, what it means to be vulnerable in our conversation, how do we actually listen, how do we actually speak so that we've got genuine dialogue happening.
You said something earlier that totally kind of resonated with me, and that was sometimes we say something and we think the other person, at least that's how I'm interpreting what you said, that we're saying something, we know what we're thinking, we know what we want to say, but what comes out is not what we're thinking, so it's not received the same way.
Correct.
So what tip can you give me and our audience on how can we make sure that what we're thinking comes out through, that we hear ourselves saying what we're thinking?
Right, yes.
Because it's happened to me, right?
Of course, and it does. I think what happens, Francesca, is that we always too quick to respond, and we don't actually take a time out. And by that I mean even a minute pause is enough for us to collect ourselves just so that we say the right words. You know, sometimes, particularly in an argument, let's take an argument as an example, you know, tempers are volatile and the conversation gets really heated, and we tend to speak from our emotion and we just blurt out whatever it is that's hurting us at the time. Whereas in fact, if we just took maybe that 5-second rule that Mel Robbins talks about, 5 seconds just to think, well, hang on a minute, how do I want to phrase this so that I can communicate in a loving way and so that it shows that I listen? So the first thing I would say to do is actually to pause. And then the second is to understand that the person I'm speaking to, we all have filters. I've got my own life experience, you have your life experience. And I see my life and everything around me through that filter. So I've got to not only get through my filter, but I've got to get through your filter too. And we can't, it's impossible to break down those filters altogether. My tip is what we do is we try to make them as porous as possible so that the language and the messaging flows as clearly and as authentically as we can make it.
Is there something else that you notice, let's say by observation, having your own expertise in the area? I'm going to assume that you notice things in communication more so than most people. Is there anything particular that you notice that repeats very often among people that could be tweaked besides the pausing and speaking too quickly?
Yes. Well, I tend to see, and this is from my own experience and may not necessarily be true, and I hate to generalize, but I do find that men tend to talk rather than listen. And women, we get talkers and we get listeners, but women are very much more open, I think, to understanding what it means to listen. And I find that among men, that's something that's not easily learned. And it's not true of everybody, because I have men friends who are great listeners. But generally speaking, I do tend to find that men want to talk and they don't really have a capacity because they haven't really learned how to listen. And by the time they get to their 30s or 40s or 50s, it's even more difficult then.
So I don't know if this falls within your expertise since we are in this topic, because my experience has been past where I've talked to men where I've said, did you even hear what I said? And I go, oh yes, I heard it. It's like, okay, repeat it back. And they have heard it. And they can repeat it all back, but it almost seems like they repeat it back, but they haven't really processed it.
Exactly, and that's what it is. It's the processing. So there's a difference between hearing and listening. And, it's many people, and kids can do this too, when they've got 1,000 things going on and you're telling them to wash the dishes or something, they will have heard what you said and they can repeat exactly what you said word for word. But you're right about the processing. It hasn't in fact registered. And I honestly have not yet found the secret to how we unlock that. Mm-hmm. But there has got to be something. The way that we can deal with it, however, because, if it is a problem, and if we can't solve the problem, we have to try and make the problem not go away, but to reduce it or minimize it, really is to speak lovingly and to listen ourselves, because there's a deeper conversation that's going on below the words, below the surface of the actual conversation. And sometimes it's very hard. I think it really means that we have to listen and to speak heart to heart rather than mouth to mouth. And that's not always an easy thing to do. One of the problems, of course, is that, even if we're, I hate to use this word, but I'm just going to say it because I think people will get what it means, enlightened in the communication process, it doesn't mean that the person we're speaking with has the same enlightenment, and so they may not have the ability to listen with empathy and to speak with empathy.
So always come from getting this right from you, always come from a place of kindness.
Absolutely, yes.
Can't go wrong with that.
No, never, right? And we learn that as kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So for your programs, the programs that you offer, are they all in person, or do you work with clients that are not local, or is it just local? Do you have to come here?
Yes, I work with clients locally. I'm based in Richmond, and my workshops are
British Columbia, Canada.
Yes, British Columbia, Canada. Sorry, I forgot we have an international audience. Yes, my workshops are all local, and they're held in Richmond or Vancouver. So, beautiful setting for those of you who do want to come to a communication workshop. It's a lovely part of the world.
And it's close to the airport. The airport is right there.
Yes, that's right.
Very convenient.
Yes.
Awesome.
So they are in person. So far, I haven't offered anything online. And there might be something in the works down the road, but not immediately.
So for the family side of things, and for the business side, you do the workshops and with the lawyers and business entrepreneurs. What about families? Do you have workshops for them as well?
So workshops not for families, but workshops for adults. And those workshops are actually the ones that I was speaking about, where I have the 2-hour workshop once a month, and then every 2 or 3 months I have a full day workshop. Those are in fact aimed at helping people create and maintain connection. And that could be in the workplace, but mostly it's in the family. But I think that what we do within the family, we can take out to our wider community as well.
Beautiful. And you have a book in the works.
I do, yes, I'm very excited. It went off to the publisher 2 weeks ago, and I'm still waiting to hear back from them. But I'm hoping that it will be published by the end of the year, and it's called Conversations with Couples. This particular book is the first in a series, and this one is about couples and how they can actually achieve intimate, heartfelt conversation.
And that is so important.
Yeah.
Because I think if you can remove the conflict from within the home, you remove conflict on the outside.
Absolutely.
You need peace at home. You need to start with peace inside at home.
Exactly.
With yourself,
right.
with the other person, and then with the world, right?
Absolutely, that's right. And you know, I mean, it may sound trite and cliche to say it, but I really believe that we can achieve world peace if we do it one conversation at a time.
I agree. I totally agree. If our audience wants to get in touch with you, where is the best place to get in touch with you?
The best place is, in fact, to connect with me through my websites. My law practice is valc.ca, and my communications website is communicationsmastery.com.
Beautiful. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience before we go?
Well, perhaps I could just leave a little tip, and that little tip would be this. It doesn't matter who you meet, where you meet, just standing in the grocery line, the way to start a conversation is to smile. And if you continue smiling throughout that conversation, that is how we start building peace around us.
And smile is part of kindness.
Yes, for sure.
I love it.
Wonderful.
Isn't that beautiful? That is beautiful. Wow. Well, Veronica, this has been absolutely enlightening, to use the word you use. I know you don't like that word, and I think I understand why, because sometimes there are these words that are used as cliches or overused, but it does kind of reflect what you mean, right? So I do feel I had a little extra insight on communication from what you said. And check out Veronica's website for if you have a small business and you need understanding of the legalese, right? If you're legal and you need help in speaking plain language, and even for family, just regular communication.
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Francesca.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Give me a hug.